Hello, welcome to Aging Well in America. Every day, 10,000 people turn 65 in the United States. Today, there are 5.5 million people are the age of 85 or older, and by 2050, the year 2050, that number will grow to 20. 20 million people will be aged 85 or older. Are we ready? Is America ready? There's so much good work going on right here in our own community and around the country. And I have with us today one of the gentlemen in our community who's doing some of that good work. I'm Anne Marie Gattari, your host, and I'd like to introduce Wayne Hindmarsh.
Good morning.
Welcome, Wayne.
Thank you. Good
Wayne,
to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, and you're here to talk with us about something that everybody wonders about. Some people had the foresight to get it ahead of time, and others are now considering it, and it is called long-term care insurance.
Yeah, it's really even more enveloping than that is planning for what's going to happen when you do get old. It's happening whether we want it or not. So how are we going to deal with the fact of our care when we become frail?
That's right, and frail, that's a key word.
Absolutely.
We're starting to hear that more. I mean, there's the elderly, and then there's a point where you actually medically get to a physical condition where you are frail.
Absolutely.
And help is needed. So let's talk about that. I know you've got some really good information, and I would just like to ask everybody to get your pens and paper ready, because we've got a nice presentation that Wayne is going to take us through, and it's very informative, and there's some good points you'll want to take some notes. So get your pencils and paper ready for in a moment when we get to that presentation. But right now, Wayne, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this line of the industry?
I got involved in this really about 6 years ago when my father, who then was 85, had an incident which took him to the hospital, and then from after there for 3 days he went into a long-term care facility. And during that stay there, they diagnosed him with Parkinson's and dementia. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, questions started to come at my mother and myself of, is he going to go back home? How are you going to treat him? Can you, to my mother, can you treat him? I mean, he's 6'3", you're 5'6". And all of a sudden, questions were coming to me to help her make decisions on. And that became a realization. I had no idea of what the right answers were. Then as that started with my mother caring for him at home, I started to see the financial costs of that. And one day it just became obvious that I needed to start planning for that. You know, none of us want to think of us getting older,
right?
But it's coming. So that started me looking and ultimately got me involved into this business.
Okay, so planning is the key word here. We wanted to jump right to long-term care insurance, but really it is one of the possible outcomes of starting way upstream and planning.
Right, and most of us, you know, when you think about it, most of us are through our lives, and there'll be a slide that'll come up that it says, you know, what do we do for most of our years? We try and build our wealth. So we're building our wealth, and we may have a financial advisor helping us do that. And the goal then doing that kind of work is to get some income that we know will be coming towards us when we retire. But there's that little other corner of this triangle called asset protection or wealth protection, or, okay, I've worked so hard, I've saved so much money, I think I have an income, but now what happens if I need care? And so that planning process is, and it's different for each person, but it's really about what are we going to do when we need care?
Right.
Well, there's 4 main strategies. What are we going to do?
Would you like to go to your presentation?
This would be a good time, I think.
Okay, so here we go. What's your plan? Life, dreams, reality. Wayne, why don't you take us through it, and I'll ask you some questions as we...
So this is what we've just been talking about, that little triangle, right, where we've grown our wealth, or hopefully we're growing our assets. We want to have a stream of income coming towards us. Maybe we have some desires that wealth is a legacy. Maybe I want to give something to the kids or the grandkids or the church or some civic group I believe in. but you need that corner, other corner, to really, how are you going to protect your assets? How's that going to be protected? And so that's really...
So the three points there, if you'd read those for us: wealth building at the top.
Right, guaranteed income in the lower right, and lifestyle protection, I think it is in the lower
and those
left.
are the three aspects that you were certainly talking about.
And it's that lifestyle protection corner, which is really where you start thinking about, what's my plan going to be?
Sure.
And if we went to the next slide, you know, all of us basically, we start our lives, we have our dreams, we get married, we have a family, life kind of goes along kind of smooth, there's some bumps.
Sure.
But one or two things is going to happen. The reality is we're going to die, or we're going to die. I mean, there's no nice,
right.
elegant way of saying
That's
this.
right. And it's that, decline at the end of the slide there, above the word slow death, that I think most of us would somehow like to. Of course, we all want to avoid it, but if we can't avoid it, how do we do that with dignity, with the most independence as possible, and really with the most comfort?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of that is that, depending on how that deterioration is. So for my father, it's been 5 years. There's a cost for that. That's much more expensive than suddenly having a medical event that suddenly terminates their life. So it's really planning. None of us want to slowly ride off into the sunset. We all want to suddenly end our lives if we had our choice, but that's not our choice. 70% of us, it's an interesting statistic, 70% of us are going to need some type of long-term care.
That's right.
So how are we going to
That's
pay
right.
for that?
That's right. And when you think of 70% of the numbers that we were talking about earlier, 20 million people will be older than 85
Right.
in 37 years.
And we can thank the medical world for allowing us to live longer, but we don't necessarily live better.
True.
And so that's a choice. So we basically then have about 4 different strategies you can start to consider in terms of how I'm going to deal with this long-term care. And that's what, as I recall, the next slide will be. So it basically, let's talk about costs. That's even more impressive if we talk about costs.
Yeah.
So the costs of long-term care. There's lots of different ways of looking at it, and it really depends on what you need. For example, most people think of long-term care, Anne-Marie, as being in a nursing home. Well, we don't all get there, but average costs, midpoint costs in our area for a nursing home is at least $80,000 a year.
And again, to clarify, that would be what many people think of as paid for by Medicaid, right?
Right, and we'll talk about that because that's facetious. That isn't always the case. You need to know the way that program's currently designed.
Okay.
But that cost of $80,000 a year in a nursing home, and if the average length of stay is about 2.9 years, you're $230,000. And if you have a diagnosis of dementia, it can be much longer than 3 years.
Yes, it can.
So, and assisted living can be at least $3,000 a month. And with assisted living, it really depends. I tell clients sometimes, assisted living's kind of like college dorm life, but not as nice. You're going to have a monthly cost, but then what do you need on top of that? How many meals do you want to go to? Do you want someone to clean your place? Do you need someone to help make sure you're taking your medication? Do you need somebody to help you with some basic care? As you add those services, you start getting up to $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 or more a month, and and it depends on what facility you're in.
That's true. So just if we could stay on that assisted living bullet for a moment, because there's also something called independent living, right? And that is typically expected to be a place where you would live and truly be independent.
Right.
And maybe need some minimal services that you can contract with an agency to provide some help with the activities of daily living. But assisted living, as you're speaking of, almost certainly your loved one will need some additional additional care. So that base monthly monthly rent, if you will, is typically much higher than that.
And then many of us, when we start this care need, will start it at home.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most of us have asked, where do you want to be if you need care? We're going to say, I want to be in my house. I love the place, I'm comfortable with the place, that kind of thing.
Everybody wants to be home.
Absolutely. And that has a charge when you bring in a service
That's
to
true.
help you. And it depends on how long. Is that service going to, do you only need a few hours a day? Or do you really need somebody with you 24 hours a day? And then you can get up to significant numbers again.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. So again, that's why we're talking about planning, right?
Absolutely. You need to get an idea of, if this money cost is coming at me, how am I going to deal with it? And that's where we get to those 4 strategies. And there's basically 4 of them. And if we can, let's go to that next slide and just kind of talk through some of them. So let's talk about the options of family. Many people, well, we all think if we have kids, you know, our kids will help us. But in the back of our mind, we say, I'm not sure I want them to help me, right? First off, in today's world, Anne-Marie, not always are our kids down the street anymore. They're another state or 2 away. They have their own lives. They have their own families. It's interesting when a child, now an adult, is asked to help care for mom or dad. Studies show that they start losing income themselves. They have to make arrangements at work. They have to cut back at work. Maybe they have to stop work. So the family's there, and it's not to say family can't be there, but there's also...
There's a medical impact on the family caregiver as well. I recently read that the #1 reason people do go to nursing homes or long-term care facilities is their family caregiver became ill and could no longer care for them. So it was so ironic to me that what that adult son or daughter was so much trying to avoid, they actually made it happen by not getting help themselves, by refusing, and it could be, you know, whoever it is who makes the decision to not get additional assistance. Just a side story here, my own personal situation. I have 3 sisters who live in the Detroit area, and a couple years ago, both of our parents were needing care. They were both in their late 80s at the time. And even with 4 very well-meaning adult daughters on the case, we still needed additional help from professionals, and we hired an agency to help us to supplement the work that we were doing with our parents.
Yeah, it's a great point. And the other part of it that people don't always understand is there is a stress level that comes when you suddenly are involved, to whatever degree, with your parents or an aunt or an uncle's care. It's a whole different kind of stress.
Yes. And the good news is there are so many, there's a lot of help out there these days. There are many resources. There's care managers who overlook the whole case and will help walk families through. There's home care agencies such as ours. There's, and then of course the type of consulting that you do as well. Right. So, but getting back to some of those options. So the next one is
most people will say, I don't want my kid to be a burden on the kids.
Sure.
So let's set that aside. So there's 2 government programs. There's Medicare, and people sometimes mistake that Medicare has never been designed to be a long-term care solution.
That's right.
You're going to have Medicare pay for your care in a nursing home if you've had some event that took you to the hospital for 3 days and you now need rehabilitation. The most you'll get is maybe 100 days. So Medicare is not a long-term care solution. Medicaid currently, which is a joint federal government and state program, is asset-based. So in today's world, if you as a couple have more than $109,000 in assets, we're not counting your house, We're not counting a car.
Okay.
Before you can get Medicaid to help pay for your care, you've got to spend down your other assets till you have $109,000 left. And currently, Medicaid's really only going to pay if you're in a traditional nursing home. A lot of folks, that's not why they have a retirement fund in their mind to pay for that to get to Medicaid. And then there's challenges with Medicaid. Is there a facility available? And those rules probably are going to change with the economics of the government. But so there's not a real long-term care government solution that'll allow you to be at home.
That's
and
true.
That kind of thing.
Right.
You can look at our third bullet point is you can look at self-insuring. And some people have the assets where they can do that.
Talk about that a little bit. What is that? What does that mean, self-insuring?
Well, that basically means you become the insurance company or the provider. So I need care, I'm at care at home, I have one of your staff coming in to help me, it's costing me X dollars a month, I write a check myself and pay you.
Private pay
Private
is
pay,
what you mean.
exactly.
Okay.
And some folks can do that. There's nothing wrong with that if you have that kind of amount of money. But other times, the challenge with that can be that when you don't get a postcard saying next week you're going to start needing long-term care.
Exactly.
So not always is the timing right to take some of my assets, which are non-liquid, non-cash, and move them into cash. So nothing's worse than trying to change an asset into cash under the gun. You like to do that timing.
That's exactly
so
right.
So self-insuring is a choice. Some people can do it, but they sometimes want to control that timing. So they might look at other ways to handle costs shorter term while they get their ducks in a row.
I see. Okay.
And then the final point is you might look at long-term care insurance, which really is taking some of those costs or all of the costs. It really depends on how you structure your plan. And having an insurance company basically help pay for your care when you go on.
So you're buying a policy when you're in your 50s, ideally, 60s.
Right. Yeah. You're buying a policy. Best time to do it is when you're 50 or 60. You can buy it in your 70s. Each year you wait, it's a little more, it costs more to start.
Just like life insurance, correct?
Yeah. But so long-term care insurance is there, so when you need to go on claim and you need help, you can start to use that and use those assets to help pay for your care. And maybe you have to contribute less then.
Talk to us a little bit about the different types of long-term care insurance policies. There are some that pay so much per day. There are some that pay so much per, different periods of time, and they'll pay for different types of care.
You can find a number of different policies.
Okay.
Most people, when they hear about long-term care insurance, will say, well, how much am I going to get a day? More and more companies are hoping people look at monthly amounts. It's a little easier to do the bookkeeping for. You can get plans that will just pay for a nursing home. Those are still available. I'm not sure they always make sense because less than 30% of us are ever going to get to a nursing home. There are policies that'll pay at the other end for care at home, assisted living, a nursing home, help pay for hospice care, depending on what's right for you. You can get policies that are a combination life insurance policy or also a traditional long-term care policy. So the business has changed such that you have a lot of choices. You can literally create a policy that's right for you.
That's interesting what you just said. You can get a policy that's connected to a life insurance policy.
You can.
So that if you don't use up the care part of it, there is
it's a death benefit for someone.
There's a death benefit.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's relatively new and it's gaining in popularity.
Is it fair to ask what these policies cost?
Well, it's hard to answer that. Certainly the
sure
ultimate
it is.
the ultimate measurement in any policy is affordability, and affordability is kind of determined by each couple.
Sure.
And also there's some generalities. The more coverage I have, the more money available to me each month, the higher that starting premium is going to be. What kind of inflation protection am I going to put on it? The more robust inflation protection, that's going to add some cost.
Yeah.
The age you are is going to impact your cost. And one of the things going to come in 2013 that especially women should be aware of is they're going to start changing premium calculations so that right now, if you or I are the same age and going to get quoted the same policy, the premium's the same. Starting next year, the industry's changing that. We know that women live 5 years longer than a man if it's a relationship and the husband passes first. We know just generally women live longer because they do what the doctor says. So premiums are going to go up next year. About
For
20% for women starting out. So we encourage women to think about it if they can, if it makes sense now, because it's going to be less expensive than it will be in about a year.
Really? Boy, that puts the pressure on, doesn't it?
Well, it's just a reason to look at it.
Sure.
And it still may not be right. I mean, it's not
I
always right for
understand.
everyone.
This is really a very, very personal, individualized type of decision, and it really makes sense to find a consultant, an expert in the field, and spend some time with them, sit down. This is not something that a couple or person is going to make a decision and after one meeting, I would think.
Most of the time people don't unless they've done a lot of homework.
Yeah.
It is a very important decision. It's not like some insurances where you get long-term care insurance. You know, I've had this about 5 years. Let's see what the premium is through some other carriers. It's normally not going to be less because you're 5 years older, so they're going to quote your age then.
That's right.
It's an important decision. It's worthy of a conversation around the table about what do we want to have available.
There have been some changes in long-term care insurance policies in the last 10, 15 years, and I know I often hear people who dismiss it using the reason that they have heard that policy premiums have gone up or they went for their benefit and it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So can you talk about what the industry, what the insurance vehicle was years ago and how it has grown and really matured, and why now it really is something you can rely on? I think some of those earlier experiences may have tainted
well, when it started, the first policies were written in 1974, and they really were just nursing home policies. They'd only pay if you went to a nursing home. Over time, they started, and if you think back then, that's all there was. I mean, you stayed at home with the kids or in your own house, or there was a nursing home. Assisted living, independent living, all those things hadn't started yet. So as those opportunities became offered, insurance companies started to look at that. Even the home care business was not really developed in the mid-70s, where today it's pretty robust. And, and you can find great companies to help you care at home.
A lot of options, a lot of companies out there.
So what also has happened is it's a very experiential business. You know, in life insurance, we kind of know that one day we will use our life insurance and they can forecast in population costs. The challenge in long-term care is that I've got to predict a population when they're going to need costs. When am I going to go on? When is this population going to need care? Which is a very different forecasting. So I will hear people say it's really expensive. Well, it can be really expensive. You need to get a policy that's affordable. But I'll tell you what's expensive. What's expensive is $84,000 a year, somebody paying for your care. So insurance companies have tried to make it more flexible, where you have more choices, where you can get care at home, and where you can structure it in different ways that you can normally massage a policy, a plan, to fit within your needs.
And can you be relatively confident that if you buy a policy today at a certain premium, the premiums are not going to change?
You probably have more confidence if you're getting a policy today that's going to happen than in the past, and here's why. Whenever a premium is created, it's based on some assumptions.
Of course.
If you think back about what money earned, an insurance company takes your premium, has to invest it, because one day you're going to go on claim probably. In past years, what were real secure investments paying? 5%, 6%? Well, today, what are they paying? 1%, 1.5%. So many of the increases people who have policies are getting is because the assumptions don't work. They're not making 5 or 6% off those premiums, so they've had to increase premium costs. Now, for those who are looking at policies today, that world has been built into that premium.
Sure.
We're only going to make 1.5%.
Sure.
So you can never say premiums won't go up. What you can say is it's really kind of forecasted and structured today in terms of the real world.
Okay, so when you're sitting with somebody, you help them understand and really plan for those premiums 5, 10 years out.
You need to be able to understand, when you develop that plan, what happens if. You know your premiums normally will stop when you go on claim, but if they do increase, are you going to be able to afford it? You can always dial down or change your policy to keep your premium lower.
So there's some flexibility.
There is flexibility, absolutely.
Wayne, we've come to the end of our half hour, believe it or not. This has been exceptionally informative.
Well, if time permits, there is a document that's non-company specific called a Guide to Long-Term Care Insurance.
Okay.
If folks want to send an email to LTCI at gmail.com, we'll send right out that document
LTCI at LTCI Guide
right?
at gmail.com. There it is, LTCI Guide at gmail.com. Send an email to Wayne at that email, and he'll send you the guide itself.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again.
Well, thank you. It was
been
great.
very, very nice having you. We've come to the end of another show. Please send us your ideas for other topics and other guests here on Aging Well in America at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. Thank you and goodbye.
That was great.
I'm